if you spend any time at all scaling up modern models, you know this feeling. It's deep in your gut. You're staring at the training metrics, the loss curve is dropping beautifully, and yet you have this gnawing question. What did the model actually learn?
Mhm.
What's reusable?
It is the central mystery, isn't it? And frankly, our current tools, our instrumentation, it's just completely out of step with the reality of the training process. We're all conditioned, almost psychologically, to see a low loss score as a win, as successful learning.
And that's the trap for you, the listener. Because a model can get to that same low-loss number down two completely different paths. Path one is, it truly internalizes general knowledge. It builds reusable circuits. Path two, it just brute force memorizes everything. Great accuracy on that data, but it's learned almost nothing it can use again.
Exactly. And the most frustrating part is that if you only look at that final number, those two paths look identical. That mismatch is exactly why we need a new instrument. And today we're going to focus on a new metric that tries to solve this. It's called epiplexity. It's designed to capture the reality of modern training by fundamentally shifting how we even define information.
Okay, so instead of the classical question, which is how random is the data, epiplexity is asking something different. It's asking how much reusable structure can a bounded learner extract into its weights? A learner with finite time.
Yes. So the mission for our time today is really to walk through the paper that introduces this. And to do that, we have to tackle three big paradoxes where classical information theory, which, served us well for decades, it just breaks down in the world of machine learning.
Okay, let's unpack that first failure point. The paper highlights this critical trap with randomness, where the classic view confuses, useful structure with just useless noise.
This is the fundamental tension. I mean, classical theory relies so heavily on Shannon entropy. And Shannon entropy defines information based on uncertainty, on randomness. So random noise has extremely high entropy. It's maximally unpredictable. Classically, that makes it maximally informative.
But wait, if I feed my model a stream of totally random bits, what is it learning? It's not gaining a skill, right?
Precisely. It's learning nothing reusable. The only instruction it gets is, this is random, pay the cost and move on. So your training budget is just spent hitting some irreducible baseline loss. But highly structured data, like natural language with all its long-range patterns, that might have lower raw entropy, but it forces the model to build complicated, powerful internal machinery to succeed.
Hold on, let me challenge that for a second. If the model just memorized a massive list of, say, hashes or IDs to reduce its loss, why isn't that information under this new definition? I mean, it's still learning if it's minimizing the objective, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, it is learning, but it's learning something fragile, something non-reusable. If the model memorizes 10 million unique file paths, it minimizes the loss on that specific data, sure. But the internal machinery it builds is just a giant lookup table. It's useless for predicting anything else. Epiplexity is all about the bits that represent the program, the reusable skill, not the data it memorized.
I see the distinction now. And you can really feel this difference when you're training on different kinds of data, which the source material lays out so well.
Absolutely. Think about the pain points in an actual training run. You feed a model random bits, the loss just stalls. You haven't wasted much compute because it just gives up. You feed it natural text, the loss drops steadily, and you feel that progress because you know it's building those reusable circuits.
But then there's that third category, the really tricky one. Things like UUIDs, file paths, complex logs. This is what they call predictively painful data. The loss stays high, the model churns and churns, and in the end, it's just paid a huge cost to memorize things.
And that's the simple takeaway. Your training budget is paying for the structural, reusable bits. If all your compute is just spent paying the prediction bill for noise, you've wasted your money. Epiplexity is designed to quantify that structural part.
All right, so now that we know why we need to separate reusable skill from memorized noise, we need a tool that can actually do it. How do we get to a formal definition?
Well, we have to move past classical information theory, which always asks, if I already know the distribution, how many bits do I need to describe a sample? That's just entropy.
And the reality check here is training never gives the model the full distribution. It gives it a finite data set, a limited model, and critically a fixed compute budget.
Precisely. It's an extraction process under constraint. So epiplexity is built around minimum description length, or MDL. If you think of training like accounting, MDL splits the total cost into two ledgers.
An accounting analogy, I like that. What are the two ledgers?
Ledger 1 is the model bits. That's the complexity of your network itself, your stored program. Ledger 2 is the data given model bits. That's your residual loss, the error you still pay. And MDL says the best model is the one that minimizes the sum of both.
So it's always trying to compress the data by building a better program. But then there's this modern twist, the bounded part. That seems critical for AI.
Oh, absolutely. In theory, the best model might take infinite time to find. In the real world, the best model is the one that compresses the data well, subject to a runtime limit. This brings in the bounded learner.
So the formal definition in the paper, epiplexity is the length of the optimal time-bounded probabilistic program. They call it P-star.
That's the core of it. That length is the measure of the structural bits, the reusable program. And this bakes in the observer, If you change the compute budget, the line between what's structure and what's noise actually changes.
Okay, so let's nail down the output.
Yeah.
Training is like a two-part compression scheme. You get a portable program and then the cost of the leftover randomness.
Exactly. The weights of the network, the program itself, that is the epiplexity. It's the organized functional machinery. The remaining loss, the bits you still have to pay per token. That's the time-bounded entropy.
So time-bounded entropy is the stubborn loss.
Yeah.
The price of the data is raw unpredictability that you just can't compress away without way more resources.
Yes, and epiplexity is the skill. It's the thing that shows up as generalization, the knowledge you can carry into a totally new task because you learned a compact, reusable rule.
This gets us to the three paradoxes in the paper, and this is where it gets really interesting. They challenge these classical theorems, but we see them happening every day at scale.
Right. Paradox 1, creating information via deterministic processes. Classical theory, whether it's Shannon or even the deeper stuff like Kolmogorov complexity, it says you cannot increase information by just running a fixed program. The output is already baked into the input.
But then you have something like AlphaZero. It starts with just the simple deterministic rules of chess or Go. No outside data. Yet the strategies it develops are superhuman. They are complex, they were deep, and they were definitely not explicitly coded in. That feels like a huge increase in information.
It does feel like magic. But epiplexity resolves it by saying, what about the time limit? For a bounded learner, deterministic compute unfolds latent structure. An observer can't just brute force the outcome of 50 chess moves. So the learner is forced to develop shortcuts, these reusable algorithmic chunks like don't let the queen get trapped.
So epiplexity is designed to count the value of those extracted shortcuts. The information wasn't created from nothing, but the structural knowledge was extracted and made portable, which for a real learner is the same thing.
And that moves us to paradox 2, why data order matters. Shannon's symmetry of information says the total information in a pair of variables is the same no matter the order you model them. X given Y or Y given X, it doesn't matter.
But we all know LLMs strongly prefer left-to-right English. If you reverse a Wikipedia article or just shuffle the sentences, you have the same raw content, but the learning process is completely different. It forces the model into a much harder internal program.
The change isn't in the content, it's in the accessibility of the structure. The paper makes a great connection to cryptography here. With one-way functions, time-bounded entropy can be provably different depending on the direction. The same content can look easy one way and incredibly hard the other.
So if the model is struggling to predict a shuffled sequence, it means it's building a more complex internal structure just to encode the same raw information. We're paying more compute for the extraction.
Which leads right into paradox 3. Likelihood modeling is more than distribution matching. If all we were doing was matching the data distribution, then the best possible model should just be the program that generated the data in the first place.
That doesn't really hold up, does it? Why not?
The wrinkle is that a generator might be easy to sample from fast to create new examples, but its structure could make evaluating the probability of any given input incredibly difficult. So a bounded learner might actually develop a more sophisticated, more compressed algorithm for evaluation than the generator itself has.
And this is where that great analogy from the text comes in. Conway's game of life. The rules are incredibly simple, right? Birth, death, survival. But these emergent things, gliders and spaceships, they aren't coded in the rules. They just emerge.
Exactly. A bounded observer who can't simulate the game forever learns to reason in terms of the gliders. It's a massive shortcut. They develop a high-level language. And that sophisticated emergent program is the epiplexity. It's a better predictor than just the raw rules.
Okay, that's a powerful idea, but let's get practical. You're running a job, you want to measure this. How do you quantify something like P-star without looking at 175 billion weights?
You don't. You avoid the weight tensor. The breakthrough suggestion is to encode the learning process itself. You track how the model's predictions change over time.
And the easiest on-ramp for practitioners is something called Prequential coding. So how do we estimate epiplexity just from the loss curve we're already looking at?
Prequential coding basically treats the loss curve like a bill for the structure you still have to learn. The total area under the loss curve, specifically the area above the final loss, is a simple proxy for the learned structure, the epiplexity. That final loss value itself is just the time-bounded entropy, the leftover cost.
So a sharp, fast drop in loss means you learned a lot of structure for cheap.
Yeah.
But a slow, grinding decrease, even to the same final loss, means you paid a huge compute cost for that structure.
And they show this so clearly with those cellular automata experiments, Rule 54 and Rule 30. Rule 54 showed a slow, gradual loss decrease. It cost a lot of compute, but the internal program it produced had much epiplexity.
And Rule 30?
Rule 30 generates patterns that look complex but are basically just noise. It yielded maximal time-bounded entropy. Almost no epiplexity was learned because there were no compact rules to find. The loss curves looked totally different, and the metric captured that difference in learned value perfectly.
So if Prequential is the quick and dirty estimate, what's the more rigorous method?
That would be Requential coding. This is the more formal accountant for the theory. It uses the cumulative KL divergence, the difference between the probability distributions of a teacher model and your student model, as the coding cost.
Sounds much more accurate, but also much more expensive.
It is. The trade-off is real. It's more principled, but it's often 2x to 10x slower. But, and this is a big but, the paper notes that empirically, both methods tend to rank datasets in a very similar order. So the simple approach is a great place to start.
Okay, let's bring this back to Earth for someone running pipelines. How does epiplexity actually pay rent? How does it save money?
It pays rent by giving you a missing optimization axis. If MDL was always about selecting the best model for your data, epiplexity is the dual of that. It's a criterion for selecting the best data for your fixed compute budget. And that is a huge shift.
That is a huge shift. We're used to tuning the model, the hyperparameters. Now we're tuning the data stream based on the structure it provides.
Exactly. The workflow becomes pretty clear. Sample small slices from your huge corpus. Train small proxy models on a fixed short budget. Then measure the epiplexity proxies from the training dynamics, the process, not the final number. And then you keep the data that gives you high epiplexity per unit of compute, and you toss the rest.
This ties right back to the budget. Compute is so expensive, we have to know which tokens are buying us reusable capability versus which are just making us pay a memorization bill.
It's a powerful shift in thinking. Stop asking which dataset gets a lower final loss and start asking which dataset gives me the most internal structure for the least compute. You want a favored data where progress comes from learning compact rules.
And that means being really suspicious of data that's hard to predict for, boring reasons.
Precisely. If your model is spending millions of compute hours trying to predict random log entries or giant JSON hashes, data that spikes your loss, you are probably just memorizing noise. That stuff rarely builds durable skills. You have to filter out the noise that's masquerading as information.
Okay, what about synthetic data? Classic ideas would suggest it's useless, right? You can't create information. But we know it often helps.
The epiplexity lens just resolves this completely. Like we saw with AlphaZero, deterministic transformations can increase the structural content that's visible to a bounded learner. They don't add new raw info, but they can unlock structure that was already latent.
So the quality of synthetic data isn't about does it look real. It's more about does it force the model to build better internal compression algorithms.
That is the perfect way to frame it. Good synthetic data raises the learning pressure, it boosts epiplexity, and that shows up as better generalization.
And can we actually link this to real-world performance? Does higher epiplexity really mean a better model?
They did measurements across different modalities. OpenWebText, natural human language carries the most extractable epiplexity. Chess is close behind. And at the very bottom was CIFAR-5M, the image dataset. Over 99% of its information was just random noise at the pixel level, which lines up with our intuition perfectly.
Right. Text has rules, hierarchy. Raw pixels are just high entropy.
And most importantly, they ran experiments where a data selection strategy, ADO, explicitly chose data that yielded higher epiplexity. And that strategy didn't just give better loss curves, it led to improved downstream performance and better out-of-distribution perplexity on totally different data sets. the model learned more reusable skill.
So the key caveat, they're clear about this, is that Epiplexity measures the information you extracted, not whether that information matches your specific benchmark. But as a debugging tool, as a data selection tool, just knowing what structure you paid for is revolutionary.
I think to sum it all up, we have to move past this mismatch. We talk about entropy and loss, but the product we're actually building is a compressed, learned internal program.
And Epiplexity finally gives us a name for that missing part. The structural information your bounded training run can distill into its weights. Optimizing for that program gives you models that generalize because they have something real inside them, not just memorized coincidences.
So if you're involved in any big data pipeline, the call to action is to upgrade your instrumentation. Start looking beyond just that final loss number.
Plot your loss, sure, but then use a proxy like the area under the curve to start estimating the epiplexity you're building.
And here's the final thought to mull over. Take the same raw content and just compare different data orderings. Or compare your natural data to the stuff coming out of your synthetic pipelines. What changes in the learning process itself? How quickly or how painfully does the loss drop when you shift the organization of the data? That's the signal you need to capture to really understand what your model is learning.